The medal was small, discreet, pinned inside William Hayes' conductor jacket where most passengers would never see it. He'd worn it every day for 18 years, not for recognition, but as a private reminder of a time when his decisions had affected more than train schedules and ticket collections. Until the day when passenger Daniel Morrison caught a glimpse of it and recognized not just the Army Commendation Medal, but the specific attachments that indicated this conductor had received one of the highest honors for valor in combat. And Morrison knew he had to find out why a decorated war hero was checking tickets on the 6:15 train to Philadelphia. Welcome to Veteran Stories. Before we continue this powerful story of hidden valor, quiet dignity, and the moment when 18 years of invisible service revealed an extraordinary past, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who serve in ways we rarely see. The 6:15 a.m. Amtrak train from Washington Union Station to Philadelphia 30th Street Station carried the same mix of passengers every weekday morning. Commuters with their coffee and newspapers, business travelers checking emails on laptops, and the occasional tourist heading north to see the Liberty Bell. The journey took exactly 3 hours and 23 minutes, covering 225 miles of track that had carried millions of passengers over the decades. William Hayes had been the conductor on this route for 18 years. At 64, he moved through the 8 passenger cars with the steady reliability that regular travelers had come to expect. He knew most of the commuters by sight, remembered their usual seats, and could spot a new passenger from 3 cars away. Hayes wore the standard Amtrak conductor uniform, navy blue jacket with silver buttons, matching pants, and the traditional conductor's cap that fewer railroad employees wore these days. But Hayes was old school. He believed the uniform meant something, that passengers deserved to see their conductor as someone who took the job seriously. His routine never varied. Board the train at 6:10, check with the engineer about any delays or track conditions, then begin ticket collection starting with the first car and working systematically through each section. He carried a small hole punch, a stack of seat check slips, and the kind of quiet authority that kept even difficult passengers polite and cooperative. Most travelers barely looked at him. He was part of the train's infrastructure, necessary, professional, but invisible in the way that good service should be. Daniel Morrison boarded the 6:15 train every third Tuesday for his monthly appointment at the Philadelphia 5A Medical Center. A 34-year-old Army veteran who'd served 2 tours in Iraq, Daniel appreciated routine and respected people who did their jobs with competence and dignity. Over the past year, he'd developed a quiet respect for Conductor Hayes. The man ran his train with military precision, on time, organized, treating every passenger with the same professional courtesy, whether they were traveling coach or business class. Daniel noticed things other passengers missed: the way Hayes moved through the swaying cars without losing his balance, the way he could spot trouble before it developed, the way he carried himself with the kind of bearing that suggested military service, though Hayes had never mentioned anything about his background. This Tuesday morning, Daniel was returning from a particularly difficult appointment. The VA doctors were optimistic about his recovery from a combat injury, but the process was slow and sometimes discouraging. As he settled into his usual seat in car number 4, he looked forward to the quiet efficiency of Hayes's ticket collection. There was something reassuring about watching a professional do his job well. Hayes approached Daniel's seat at exactly 6:47 a.m., right on schedule. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison. Philadelphia today?" "Yes, sir. Same as always." Daniel handed over his ticket, and Hayes began the familiar routine of checking, punching, and providing the seat check slip. But as Hayes reached down to retrieve a ticket that had fallen to the floor, his conductor jacket shifted open slightly. That's when Daniel saw it. Pinned to the inside of Hayes's vest was a small military decoration. Daniel's training kicked in immediately. 2 tours in Iraq had taught him to recognize military awards and what they meant. This wasn't just any decoration. It was an Army Commendation Medal, but with attachments that made Daniel's breath catch. The medal had a V device, indicating it had been awarded for valor in combat. Below it was an oak leaf cluster, meaning Hayes had received the award multiple times. and attached to the ribbon was a small bronze star device that Daniel recognized as indicating additional acts of heroism. Daniel had received an Army Commendation Medal himself for his service in Iraq, but his was for meritorious service, the standard recognition for a job well done. Hayes's medal configuration indicated something entirely different. Multiple acts of valor in combat, the kind of recognition that came with stories most people never heard. Hayes finished checking Daniel's ticket and moved on to the next passenger, unaware that his carefully hidden secret had been discovered. Daniel sat back in his seat, his mind racing. Army Commendation Medal with V device and oak leaf cluster. That wasn't routine recognition. That was serious combat valor, multiple times. Daniel had served alongside men who'd received similar awards, and they were uniformly people who'd done extraordinary things under impossible circumstances. But Hayes was a train conductor. He'd been checking tickets for 18 years, as far as Daniel knew. When had he served? What had he done to earn that level of recognition? And why was he riding the rails instead of receiving the kind of respect that combat veterans with his decorations typically commanded? Daniel waited until Hayes had moved to the next car, then quietly moved to the cafe car where he could think. He needed to process what he'd seen and decide whether to approach Hayes about it. During the 3-hour journey to Philadelphia, Daniel found himself unable to concentrate on anything other than what he'd discovered. He'd noticed Hayes's military bearing before, but now it made complete sense. The way Hayes moved through the train cars, the way he assessed situations, the way he maintained calm authority even when dealing with difficult passengers, all of it spoke to military leadership training. But what kind of military service earned multiple commendation medals for valor? Infantry in heavy combat zones, special operations, military police in hostile areas, convoy security during the height of insurgent activity. Any number of situations where split-second decisions and personal courage made the difference between life and death. Daniel tried to imagine Hayes in uniform, in combat, making the kinds of decisions that earned recognition for valor. The quiet, professional conductor who'd been punching his ticket for over a year had clearly been someone very different during his military service. By the time the train reached Philadelphia, Daniel had made his decision. He was going to find out Hayes's story. On the return trip that afternoon, Daniel positioned himself to be one of the last passengers Hayes would approach for ticket collection. When Hayes reached his seat, Daniel made his move. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, "I served 2 tours in Iraq, Army infantry." Hayes paused in his ticket-checking routine. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Morrison. I couldn't help but notice your medal this morning when you bent down to pick up that ticket." Hayes's hand moved instinctively to his jacket, checking that it was properly closed. His expression became more guarded. "I don't know what you're referring to, sir." "Army Commendation Medal with V device and oak leaf cluster," Daniel said softly. "That's not the kind of recognition you get for pushing paperwork." Hayes was quiet for a long moment, studying Daniel's face. Daniel could see the internal calculation, the assessment of whether this conversation was safe, whether this passenger could be trusted. "That was a long time ago," Hayes said finally. "Not so long that it stopped meaning something." Hayes finished his ticket collection and returned to Daniel's seat as the train approached the Maryland border. The afternoon run was less crowded, and they could talk without other passengers overhearing. "Vietnam," Hayes said simply, sitting down across from Daniel. 1971 to 1973. Daniel did quick math in his head. Hayes would have been very young, maybe 19 or 20 when he deployed. "What unit?" "1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile." Daniel knew enough military history to understand what that meant. The 1st Cavalry had been one of the primary combat units during the height of the Vietnam War, conducting air assault operations in some of the most dangerous areas of the country. The Commendation Medals? Hayes was quiet for several minutes, watching the Maryland countryside pass by the train windows. 3 separate actions, he said finally. Helicopter went down in hostile territory. Twice I went back in to get wounded soldiers out. 3rd time, my squad was pinned down by enemy fire. Someone had to do something. The matter-of-fact way Hayes described actions that had clearly involved extraordinary courage told Daniel everything he needed to know about the man's character. Over the remaining hour of the journey, Hayes shared pieces of his story. Not the operational details, he was too professional for that, but the broader outline of a young soldier's experience in one of America's most challenging conflicts. "I was 19 when I got there," Hayes said. "Thought I knew everything about being tough. Learned real quick that toughness and courage are different things." "How so?" "Toughness is about you. Courage is about the people counting on you to do your job when everything goes wrong." Daniel understood. Combat had a way of teaching lessons that couldn't be learned anywhere else. "The medals? You never talk about them?" Hayes shook his head. "What's to talk about? I did what anyone would have done in those situations." "Not anyone. That's why they give medals for it." Hayes looked directly at Daniel. "Son, the real heroes didn't come home to get medals. The medals are just reminders that we were lucky enough to survive doing our jobs." As their conversation continued, Daniel learned how Hayes had transitioned from military service to railroad work. After Vietnam, he'd struggled with the adjustment to civilian life that many veterans experienced. The railroad had offered steady work, clear responsibilities, and the kind of structured environment that felt familiar to someone with military training. "Started as a brakeman in 1975, Hayes explained. "Worked my way up to conductor. Been on this route for 18 years because I like the routine, and the passengers deserve someone who knows what he's doing." "Ever think about doing something that used more of your military experience?" Hayes considered this carefully. "Mr. Morrison, I spent 2 years in Vietnam making life-and-death decisions every day. When I got out, I wanted a job where the biggest crisis was a delayed train or a passenger without a ticket." Daniel began to understand. Hayes hadn't been hiding from his military service. He'd been seeking the opposite of it. After experiencing combat leadership at its most intense, he'd found peace in quiet service that helped people without requiring anyone to risk their lives. As the train pulled into Union Station, Daniel realized he'd been riding with someone whose service and sacrifice he'd never fully appreciated. Hayes wasn't just a conductor. He was a combat veteran who'd earned recognition for valor and then spent decades in humble service, never seeking credit or recognition. "Mr. Hayes," Daniel said as they prepared to disembark, "I want you to know that your service means something, both your military service and what you do here on the railroad." Hayes looked surprised. "I'm just doing my job." "Yes, sir, you are. And you're doing it with the same dedication you showed in Vietnam. That matters more than you probably realize." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. That means more coming from someone who's been there." As they walked through Union Station together, Daniel noticed other passengers nodding respectfully to Hayes. They might not know his military background, but they recognized competence and professionalism when they saw it. Daniel's monthly trips to Philadelphia took on new meaning after learning about Hayes's background. He began to notice things he'd missed before, the way Hayes helped elderly passengers with their luggage, the patience he showed with confused tourists, the quiet authority he maintained without ever raising his voice. More importantly, Daniel began to see how Hayes's military training enhanced his civilian service. The attention to detail, the situational awareness, the ability to remain calm under pressure, all skills developed in combat, now applied to keeping passengers safe and comfortable during their journeys. During one trip, a passenger became belligerent about a seating assignment. Daniel watched Hayes handle the situation with the kind of de-escalation techniques that suggested training in conflict resolution. The situation was resolved quickly and professionally, without drama or confrontation. "Where did you learn to handle difficult people like that?" Daniel asked afterward. "Vietnam taught me that most problems can be solved with patience and clear communication," Hayes replied. "The other kind of problems don't usually happen on trains." Daniel began sharing Hayes's story with other veterans he knew, always with Hayes's permission and never with identifying details. The response was universal respect and recognition of someone who'd served with distinction and continued serving in civilian life. One of Daniel's friends, a retired Army Master Sergeant named Rodriguez, specifically requested to ride the 6:15 train to meet Hayes. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan, Rodriguez told Hayes during ticket collection. When Daniel told me about your Vietnam service, I had to meet you. We're all part of the same brotherhood. Hayes appreciated the recognition from fellow veterans, but he insisted on maintaining his professional focus during work hours. I appreciate the respect, he told Daniel, but my passengers come first. They're counting on me to do my job, not to discuss old war stories. Word of Hayes's service began to spread quietly through veteran networks and railroad employees, not as publicity or recognition seeking, but as the kind of respect that veterans show each other when they recognize someone who'd served with distinction. Amtrak's regional manager, herself a Navy veteran, made a point of riding Hayes's train to meet him personally. "Conductor Hayes," she said during a brief conversation in the cafe car, "I understand you're a decorated Vietnam veteran." "I'm an Amtrak conductor, ma'am. That's my job." "Yes, you are. And according to every passenger survey and employee evaluation, you're one of the best we have. I wanted to thank you for your military service and for the way you represent our company every day." Hayes accepted the recognition gracefully, but insisted on returning to his duties. Leadership, Daniel realized, was something Hayes had never stopped practicing. It had just taken different forms. 6 months after discovering Hayes's secret, Daniel faced his own transition decision. The VA had cleared him for return to full employment, and he was considering several job offers that would use his military experience and provide advancement opportunities. During one of their conversations, he asked Hayes for advice. "Sir, I'm trying to decide between a corporate security position and a government job that would use my military background more directly. What do you think?" Hayes was quiet for a while, watching the familiar Maryland countryside pass by. "Son," he said finally, "the question isn't which job uses your military experience. The question is which job lets you serve other people in a way that gives your life meaning." "How do you mean?" "I could have done a lot of things after Vietnam. Used my combat experience, traded on my decorations, taken jobs that paid more money or gave me more recognition. But I found something that lets me help people every day without anyone having to get hurt. That's worth more than any promotion." Daniel began to understand that Hayes's choice to work on the railroad wasn't about hiding from his military service. It was about finding a way to continue the spirit of service in a peaceful environment. Every day, Hayes helped hundreds of people get where they needed to go safely and comfortably. It wasn't dramatic, but it was meaningful. "You know what I realized?" Daniel told Hayes during one of their conversations. "You never stopped being a soldier, you just found a different way to serve." Hayes smiled. "That's the thing about real service, Mr. Morrison. It's not about the uniform or the recognition. It's about taking care of people who are counting on you to do your job right." As their train pulled into Philadelphia, Daniel looked around the car at passengers reading, working, sleeping, all of them trusting that Hayes would get them to their destination safely. It was a different kind of mission than what Hayes had undertaken in Vietnam, but the dedication was the same. 3 years after their first conversation about the hidden medal, Daniel learned that Hayes was approaching retirement. At 67, after 48 years of combined military and railroad service, Hayes was finally ready to step down. The railroad organized a small retirement ceremony attended by colleagues, regular passengers, and a surprising number of veterans who'd heard about Hayes' service through the informal networks that connect people who've served their country. During the ceremony, Hayes was presented with a plaque recognizing his 18 years of service to Amtrak. But Daniel noticed that Hayes seemed more moved by the personal thanks he received from passengers who'd ridden his train over the years. "Conductor Hayes," said an elderly woman who'd been riding the 6:15 train twice a week for a decade, "you always made me feel safe and welcome. That meant more than you know." "Thank you, ma'am," Hayes replied. "It was my privilege to serve you." William Hayes never intended for his military decorations to be discovered. He'd found peace in quiet service, helping people travel safely while maintaining the kind of professional standards that reflected his military training without drawing attention to his combat experience. When Daniel Morrison glimpsed that hidden Army Commendation Medal, it revealed not just a decorated combat veteran, but someone who'd spent decades proving that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It just takes different forms. Hayes's story reminds us that heroism isn't always dramatic, that the most important service often happens in routine moments, and that the values learned in military service, duty, honor, dedication to others, can transform any job into a mission. The 6:15 train from Washington to Philadelphia still runs every weekday morning, now with a different conductor. But passengers who rode during Hayes's 18 years remember the quiet professionalism, the attention to detail, and the sense of security that came from knowing their conductor took his responsibility to them personally. Some of them never learned about Hayes's military service, but all of them experienced the kind of dedication that combat veterans bring to civilian life when they find meaningful ways to continue serving. So now I ask you, have you ever encountered someone whose quiet competence suggested a history of service you never knew about? Someone whose everyday professionalism reflected training and values developed in extraordinary circumstances? Share their story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Because at Veteran Stories, we believe that the greatest service often happens in the most ordinary moments, performed by people who never stopped answering the call to serve others. Subscribe if stories like this matter to you. Because every train, every workplace, every community has people like William Hayes, veterans who found new ways to serve, new missions that matter, and new reasons to get up every morning and do their duty.